Is Donald Trump violating the law by freezing Medicaid funds? In a stunning development that has rocked the political and legal landscape of the United States, Donald Trump's administration has unilaterally decided to freeze Medicaid funding without congressional approval. This unprecedented move, which directly contradicts U.S. law, has sparked immediate legal challenges and raised serious questions about the limits of executive power. But how did we get here? What exactly has Trump done, and why is this action so controversial? More importantly, what are the potential consequences for millions of Americans who rely on Medicaid for their health care needs? To fully grasp the significance of this situation, we must first understand the legal framework that governs government spending in the United States. Under the U.S. Constitution, Congress, and only Congress, has the power to allocate federal funds. Once a program like Medicaid has been funded through the congressional budgetary process, those funds must be used as intended. There is no room for reinterpretation or executive overreach. The President does not have the authority to withhold or redirect funds without congressional approval. Trump's decision to pause Medicaid funding, therefore, represents a direct violation of the Constitution and established legal precedent. The controversy surrounding this decision exploded when Caroline Leavitt, Trump's newly appointed press secretary, confirmed that the Medicaid freeze was real. In an attempt to justify the move, she claimed that it was merely a temporary pause meant to align spending with Trump's broader agenda. However, she failed to mention one critical fact: this action is explicitly illegal. The Constitution's Article 1, Section 9, clearly states that once Congress has allocated funds, the executive branch is legally obligated to distribute them as directed. This means that by unilaterally pausing Medicaid funding, Trump is not only overstepping his executive authority, but is also committing a blatant violation of federal law. The legal violations do not stop there. Trump's Medicaid freeze also violates the Impoundment Control Act, ICA, a law specifically designed to prevent presidents from tampering with congressional spending. The ICA was enacted in 1974 in response to then-President Richard Nixon, who repeatedly attempted to withhold and redirect government funds without congressional approval. The law explicitly states that the president cannot delay or withhold funds that have already been legally appropriated unless Congress grants permission. Trump's Medicaid freeze, therefore, is not just a controversial policy decision, it is an outright violation of federal law. To put this into perspective, there are only two legal ways a president can request changes to congressional spending. The first is through a process called rescission, where the president formally proposes the cancellation of specific funds. If Congress agrees within 45 days, the funds are canceled. However, if Congress rejects the proposal, the funds must be spent as originally intended. The second option is deferral, which allows the president to temporarily delay spending, but only for routine administrative reasons, such as technical issues with fund distribution. A president cannot defer spending simply because they disagree with the policy behind it. Yet, this is exactly what Trump is attempting to do. Caroline Leavitt's statement made it abundantly clear that the Medicaid freeze is happening not for administrative reasons, but to realign government spending with Trump's political agenda. This alone makes the action illegal. Medicaid funding falls under the category of mandatory spending, meaning it is automatically funded under permanent laws and does not require annual appropriations. Congress has already legislated the necessity of these funds, ensuring they cannot be arbitrarily withheld. Trump's attempt to disrupt a crucial health care program is not just a political maneuver. It is a direct attack on the legal framework that keeps such programs running without political interference. The implications of this decision are severe. By freezing Medicaid funding, Trump is openly defying Congress, violating the separation of powers, and directly harming millions of low-income Americans who rely on these health care benefits. This move is particularly alarming given the role Medicaid plays in the healthcare system. Medicaid provides essential medical services to low-income families, seniors, and individuals with disabilities. By blocking these funds, Trump's administration is actively jeopardizing the health and well-being of some of the most vulnerable populations in the country. Legal experts have been quick to point out that the Supreme Court has ruled multiple times that presidents cannot override congressional spending decisions. Key cases such as Train v. City of New York, 1975, and Kendall v. United States, 1838, have reinforced the fact that once Congress allocates government funds, they must be spent as directed. These rulings were meant to prevent exactly what Trump is attempting, an executive power grab that undermines legislative authority. The historical precedent makes it clear that Trump's Medicaid freeze is not just controversial, it is outright illegal. With legal challenges already underway, the immediate question now is, who will stop him? Fortunately, the judicial system is already taking action. A judge has temporarily blocked Trump's Medicaid freeze until February. 3. Allowing the courts time to assess the situation more thoroughly. This intervention suggests that Trump's action will face serious legal scrutiny and could lead to a prolonged court battle that defines the limits of presidential power in his second term. Beyond the legal ramifications, Trump's decision has profound, real-world consequences. Medicaid is a lifeline for millions of Americans, and any disruption to its funding could have devastating effects. The freeze has already sent shockwaves through the healthcare system, forcing states to scramble to fill the financial gap left by the missing federal funds. Hospitals, doctors, and healthcare providers that rely on Medicaid reimbursements are now facing financial instability, which could lead to significant disruptions in patient care. Some providers may even be forced to stop accepting Medicaid altogether, leaving millions of patients without access to necessary medical services. The financial burden on states is only one aspect of the crisis. Medicaid covers nearly half of all births in the United States and serves as the primary payer for nursing home care. The immediate impact of the funding freeze on these services could be catastrophic, particularly for elderly individuals who rely on Medicaid-funded long-term care facilities. If states cannot quickly bridge the funding gap, many patients could face forced relocations or even a complete loss of care options. Politically, this decision could also backfire in significant ways. Trump's core support base includes many working-class Americans who rely on government programs like Medicaid. By targeting these funds, he risks alienating a portion of his voter base, many of whom may not realize the impact until they are personally affected. Meanwhile, House Republicans are already discussing historic Medicaid cuts, with leaked budget documents revealing plans to slash over $2 trillion in funding over the next decade. These proposed cuts, combined with the ongoing freeze, could deepen public outrage and strengthen opposition to Trump's policies. In the broader context, Trump's Medicaid freeze appears to be part of a larger effort to reshape government spending, according to conservative priorities. By restricting funding for social programs like Medicaid while redirecting resources toward tax cuts and military spending, Trump is reinforcing a pattern of governance that prioritizes corporate interests over public welfare. However, as legal battles intensify and public scrutiny grows, it remains to be seen whether Trump's administration will be able to push this agenda forward without significant political and legal consequences. Ultimately, Trump's decision to freeze Medicaid funding without congressional approval is more than just a bureaucratic maneuver. It is a direct challenge to the fundamental principles of American governance. The coming weeks will determine whether the judicial system will hold him accountable or whether this latest executive overreach will set a dangerous precedent for the future. One thing is certain: this fight is far from over, and its outcome could shape the course of U.S. politics for years to come.
China's birth rate is falling. Pension reform is urgent, and the working age population is shrinking. At a time like this, an all-out war would further cut state social spending and could provoke a popular backlash. Millions of young and urban Chinese are looking for better living standards and technology-oriented jobs. In an economic downturn, an attack on Taiwan may garner short-term support based on nationalist sentiment could put the regime in a difficult position in the long run due to the cost of living, job losses, and inflationary pressures. China is trying to become the world leader in areas such as artificial intelligence, chips, 5G, and electric vehicles. However, if the US and EU completely cut off the flow of technology with the invasion, it would undermine China's breakthroughs. How ready is Xi Jinping to pay this price? These internal vulnerabilities make Beijing wonder if there is really a window of opportunity to succeed in this invasion. Instead of strengthening the administration's position, a costly invasion could plunge the country into turmoil. Taiwan's growing international support and China's diplomatic problems make the invasion of Taiwan a pipe dream. For years, Taiwan's lack of a seat at the UN and official diplomatic recognition gave Beijing an advantage in practice. However, Taiwan is respected as a key player in the global supply chain and is sympathized with by the world community for its representation of democratic values. Western countries strongly oppose Beijing's restriction of democratic freedoms in Hong Kong, human rights violations in regions such as Xinjiang and Tibet have also escalated criticism of China. In such an atmosphere, the invasion of Taiwan would automatically become a story of an authoritarian regime attacking a small democracy. Western public opinion could show the same solidarity for Taiwan as it did for Ukraine. Having learned lessons from the Russian case, sanctions and military support could be activated much faster. Taiwan is the lifeblood of the global electronics industry, especially with chip makers like TSMC. Sabotaging this production would be a major economic disaster for the entire world, including China. Western companies and governments may therefore be more willing to take decisive action to protect Taiwan's freedom. Countries like Japan, Germany, and South Korea also rely on Taiwan for their technology supply chains, and Beijing knows that an invasion would destroy relations with those countries. In the past, European countries and developing nations had a neutral stance, saying they would not interfere in Taiwan. However, after the Russia-Ukraine war, the idea that aggression by great powers must be prevented has become widespread. Forums, such as the US, UK, and Australia's AUKUS agreement, and the Quad, Japan, India, Australia, US, are strengthening Taiwan's relationships with European or Asian capitals. While China has diplomatic alliances, in the event of an invasion of Taiwan, Beijing could face a much broader coalition. This diplomatic dynamic instills in Beijing the concern that, unlike in Ukraine, it could remain much more isolated. China is a more integrated actor in global trade and finance than Russia. Diplomatic isolation could therefore harm China much more broadly. These four main reasons reinforce the idea that a Chinese invasion of Taiwan is neither easy nor imminent. While at first glance, the military balance between the massive PLA force and tiny Taiwan may seem to favor Beijing, the reality is that Taiwan's improved defense capacity, US-led regional and global support, China's fragile economic and social situation, and Taiwan's growing diplomatic legitimacy sabotage Beijing's short-term invasion scenario. On the military front, the US, Japan, and friendly countries in the region are likely to react quickly. Taiwan could turn the landing into a nightmare with an asymmetric strategy. On the economic front, China could face international sanctions and supply chain paralysis. jeopardizing domestic social stability. On the diplomatic front, the West could build a broad coalition to defend Taiwan's democratic identity and isolate Beijing with the UN reform and universal values card. The longer China delays, the stronger Taiwan becomes. But at the same time, Beijing's own internal weaknesses are becoming apparent. Instead of finding a better window of opportunity in the future, China may have to face increasing risks. Of course, nothing is guaranteed. Strategic calculations can change quickly, but the current picture casts doubt on Beijing's thesis that it can seize Taiwan in a few weeks. A short blitzkrieg victory has become highly unlikely, no matter how prepared the Chinese leadership is for the global and regional fallout of such a gamble. The consequences are hard to predict. Taiwan, too, is not idle.